Good afternoon and good evening. Hope all of you are doing well. It is right now around 4:45 here in Wisconsin, and we'll be giving shiur on Daf Yoma, Daf Mem Gimel. And we're starting about 2/3 of the way down from the bottom. The first Amud that we're going to be learning, pretty much up until the Mishnah, is about the drashos that apply to the Para Aduma. And then from there, we're going to learn a new Mishnah, a lengthy Mishnah, which covers about half of the Amud on Mem Gimel Amud Beis, and then we'll stop at the Gemara and pick up again tomorrow night. So let's get started. We're 2/3 of the way down on Mem Beis Amud Beis at the words Amar Ula. Amar Ula, he says as follows: Kol ha-parsha kula, the entire parsha of Para Aduma, it has unique features to it. What are the unique features to it? It says mashma. Sometimes you'll see an implication, and then immediately afterwards, motzi miyad mashma. Then we'll see that it undoes that implication for a different implication. So the psukim, in other words, are difficult to learn. We'll see a shita on the top of Mem Gimel Amud Beis that this was a prevailing thought among some of the Amoraim, that they had a hard time learning the parsha of Para Aduma. And as well, says the Gemara in the name of Ula, that umashma memela, and sometimes you'd see a pasuk and you'd see another implication exactly the same as it. In other words, the way to learn out the psukim by Para Aduma is more difficult than other parshios Shabbat Torah. And the Gemara is now going to go through 8 or 9 psukim and the drashos therein. Let's get started. You should give the red heifer, the Para Aduma, to Elazar HaKohen. Says the Gemara, Osa, you should give the animal Elazar. You should give it to Elazar, who was the Skan Kohen. Below the Doros Elazar, but it doesn't always have to be given to the Skan Kohen, implying, and the pasuk implies that we don't always have to give the Para Aduma to the Skan Kohen. It can be given to someone else. Who is that somebody else? Is it a regular Kohen or is it a Kohen Gadol? It doesn't have to be the Skan Kohen, but there aren't that many options. It's either the Kohen Gadol or it's Kohane Hedyot. It says the Gemara, Ika de'ame, there are those who say Ledoros beKohen Gadol, that in the future era of the Batei Mikdash, it will always be the Kohen Gadol. Vika de'ame, there are those who say really Ledoros beKohen Hedyot. That really it's saying that in the future that the Para Aduma, the Nesina of giving over the Para Aduma to the Beis HaMikdash can be even to a Kohen Hedyot. And the Gemara questions one of these answers. Bishlama, I understand the man Amar Ladoros Bekoin Hedyot Shapir. If you want to say that when the pasuk leaves vague which Kohen to give the animal to, it doesn't have to be the skan. But when you say that it's going to go to a Kohen Hedyot Shapir, that makes a lot of sense. I could understand you. It doesn't have to be to the skan Kohanim, so it can be any Kohen. That would be a normal assumption. However, but if you're going to say that when the pasuk says that it's only Elazar during that generation, but it's not Elazar Ladoros, and therefore in the future it has to be a Kohen Gadol instead of the Skan Kohen, that's more difficult. Minale, where do you get that from? It says the Gemara, the shita that holds that when the pasuk excludes the Skan Kohen Gadol, the Elazar who is the Skan Kohen, when the Gemara excludes the Skan Kohen Gadol and it therefore includes the Kohen Gadol himself, where do we learn that from? Gamar Chuka Chuka Miyom Kippurim. It's based on Gzeira Shava, and that shita, which indicates that the Nesina of the Para Aduma has to be to a Kohen Gadol, is based on Gzeira Shava. Then the next drasha reads as follows: the Hotziosa, and it says that you have to take it out. So who's going to be doing the taking out? So we spoke about the Nesina giving the animal, the red heifer, to the Kohen, and now we're going to talk about the Hotzah, taking him out. The pasuk reads in regards to the Hotzah, v'hotziosa nichutz lamachaneh v'shachato lefanav. The Para Aduma was not shechted in the Beis HaMikdash; it was shechted outside the Beis HaMikdash. So who is doing that Yitzia? So it says the Gemara, v'hotziosa shelo yotzi acher sima. Sorry, this drasha isn't talking about the who, but it's talking about some of the surrounding features, which is who is going to go out with that animal. Can other animals go out? So it says the Gemara, no, shelo yotzi acher sima. Other animals are not allowed to go out with this Para Aduma. The red heifer has to walk out without other animals. Kiditznan, as the Mishnah writes, and this is going to be a machlokes in the Tanoim as to what is and is not allowed. The Tanakama holds as follows. Kiditznan, 6 lines from the bottom on Mem Beis Amud Beis, Lo haisa Para Rotza Latzeis. If the Para Aduma doesn't want to walk out, they're very heavy animals. You can't just drag them. They could be a couple thousand pounds. So if the animal doesn't walk out, maybe it would have been motivated to go out of the Beis HaMikdash with one of its peers. So it says the Gemara, Ein motzi anima shechora. You're not allowed to go out with another para that is a little darker than the red of the Para Aduma. Why? Because shelo yomru shchora shachto. We don't want people to say that the color of the hair of this Para Aduma was the wrong color. Vein motzi anima aduma. You're also not allowed to take out a twin, someone that has the same exact coloring. That's also not allowed. Shelo yomru shtaim shchato, because you don't want anyone to say that you shechted 2 of the same exact ones, which is also not the din of Para Aduma, only one. So that's the shita of the Tanakama. However, Rebbe Omer, and some say it's Rebbe Yossi, to change machlokas in the girsa here, Rebbe Omer, lo min Hashem, who said that's not correct. Ela mishum shenemar osa levada. Basically, the machlokas is that the Tanakama was of the opinion that there are limited things. There are only a few types of things that you're not allowed to do. You can't bring an animal that's darker, and you can't bring an animal that's exactly the same. However, the Shita of Rabbi Yossi was much more limiting, because what did it say? Nothing. You're not allowed to bring any other animals. Osa levada, no other animals. And we'll see what the difference between these two Shitas will be. The Tanakama, the Tanakama, who say that you're not allowed to bring out the animal which is darker or an animal which is the same color. But Tanakama, what do you do with the drasha of Rebbe? Haksi bosa, and he learned very differently than you that no animals at all can go out. So says the Gemara, man Tanakama. What is the shita of the Tanakama? Who is the author of such a shita? Answers the Gemara, Reb Shimon he. And Reb Shimon has a famous shita, and this is going to be based off of a Gemara Maseches Bava Metzia. What is his shita? The Darish Taimei Dekra. Being Dorish Taima Dekra means as follows. When the Torah gives us a commandment, we can look at it in a very narrow analytical way and say, what exactly does the Torah mean? And then only do exactly what the Torah says. That's the what of the Torah. But what about the why? What if we understand the rationale and the logic behind it? Do we also incorporate the why into the structure of halacha? So that Reb Shimon says, absolutely we do. And that's why he says that there's a why. It's not just osa. It doesn't mean osa that you're not allowed to bring any other animal. It means only animals about which we're going to be concerned. Shelo yomru, to say that you shechted the animal that was a darker color of red, or shelo yomru, that you shechted two paradumas. So fine, I understand. But what if you wanted to bring a donkey? No one's going to be concerned about those things. So because Rav Shimon is Dorish Time of the Krei, gives a little more latitude. Yes, you're not allowed to bring out the para aduma with an animal that's dark, or a second para aduma, maskim, but a cat, a dog, other animals that no one's going to get confused about. It's mutter to be motzi, the para aduma, to coax the para aduma to leave the Beis Hamikdash with another animal that won't generate confusion. And in fact, that's what the Gemara says. My Beinahu, last line of Membeis Medbeis. What is the difference between the two shitas, the Tanakama, who we now know as Reb Shimon, and Rebbe? Says the Gemara, Ika Beinahu, as we turn to the top of Mem Gimel Amanal, to the Apik Chamor Bahata, that let's say that all of a sudden the Paraduma sees the Chamor walking outside. He's okay. Now the Paraduma decides to walk. Is that mutter? So according to Reb Shimon, it's mutter because he's Dorish time of the Kra. If it doesn't conflict with the concerns and considerations of the pasuk, then it's going to be mutter. Ma'ashein came, the shita of Rebbe is no, the osa levada, only that one animal can leave, and you'll have to just be patient. When the paraduma is ready to walk, that's when he's ready to walk. Until then, you're going to be stuck. That would be the machloket between them, and that is pasuk number 2. Let's move on to pasuk number 3. On the top of Mem Gimel Amud Aleph, shachat osa, the shchita, shelo yishchat acherasima, yishchot acherasima. You can't shecht other animals at the same time. And what does the pasuk mean? It says, really, the pasuk is v'shachat osa lefanav. What does the word lefanav mean in that pasuk? Says the Gemara. That's a machlokes Rav and Shmuel. Rav, what does Rav mean when it says lefanav? It should be in front of you. So we saw this yesterday. What does Rav hold? Shelo yasiach daito mimena. That you're not allowed to have a hesach hadas. It has to be lefanav. You have to be focused on it. However, third line of the Shmuel, what does he say the word lefanav means when it says v'shachat osa lefanav? So he says l'Shmuel sheyehei zar shochet ve'ela zar roa. He says when it says it should be shechted in front of him, he should shecht it in front of him. Who are all of the pronouns? So Shmuel says we learn from here that a zar, that's the first person, the shachat oso lefanav, he should do the shechita in front of him, in front of a kohen. So that's Shmuel's drasha shehei zar shochet be'ela zarah, that it's okay for a zar to do the shechita. Also the sugya we discussed yesterday, machlokas and the Tanoim and the Amoraim, there's a machlokas about that. So here we're seeing Shmuel's shita again. Shehei zar shochet be'ela zarah. Next pasuk, fourth line. Who is going to do the lakicha? Who's going to do the dama be'etzba'o? Who's going to dip their finger in the blood? All right. We talked about the nesina. We've talked about the hotza. We've talked about the shchita. Now we're talking about a different step of who's going to be v'lakach elazar hakon midama be'etzba'o. Who's going to stick their finger in the blood? So the Shmuel says, why does this pasuk have to talk about Elazar Cohen again? We've mentioned his name many times in the psukim already. Why does the Chumash keep repeating his name? It says the Gemara, Ahaduri Elazar, makes sense according to him. Because according to the pasuk at the top of the page where it says Lefanav, and he said to teach you that a zar is allowed to do shchita, we had to again introduce the name of Elazar Cohen to remind us that this part cannot be done with a zar. Ahaduri Elazar, to tell us that the person who did the lakach be'etzba'o badam, that now needs to be a Kohen again, because the Shechita wasn't done by a Kohen. It could have even been done by a Zar. And according to Rav LeRav, this is have a miut achar miut. We have two psukim in a row that have miutim, that have exclusionary language. A miut achar miut ella lerabos. The afilu Kohen hedyo. And here, when we have a miut achar miut, so Rav says that when we have two exclusionary phrases in a row in the Torah, so therefore two minuses make a plus, as we have in the math world. So here what we're saying is, because there are two negative things taking place, we have a language of inclusion. What is the inclusion? The afilu Kohen hedyot. That comes to teach us that even though the pasuk says Elazar Kohen, because it is an exclusionary language, now it's miut achar miut. So it's interesting that the word Elazar is now going to teach us that afilu Kohen hedyot, that even a regular Kohen is allowed to do the lakach to take his finger, mean dama be'etzba'o. What about the next pasuk? So it says the Gemara 6 lines down, that the Kohen has to take the eitz erez, he has to take the cedar wood, ve'ezov, the hyssop, the branch that was used to dip, the shnitolas, and the ribbon. So again, we've talked about the nesina, we've talked about the hotza, we've talked about the shlita, and we've talked about the dam. We've explained all of those cases. Now we're going to the next place. What about these other aspects, the part that don't physically have to do with the para aduma? What do we do with them? So there says the Gemara, another machlokas, lishmuel. Why there does it say hakohen? That's to teach us the afilu b'kohen hedyot, that even a kohen hedyot can do that job. LeRav, according to Rav, we needed this. Why did we need this? Because I might have thought that this was different, even though we're, according to him, in the previous pasuk we were already talking about kohanim. So why here do we need to have a new reference to a kohen? Because I might have thought that kevan delav gufa de paranenu loli by kohen. Because since this aspect of the service of the para aduma has nothing to do with the physical body of the para aduma, it's the external secondary elements of the hakrava, the eitz erez and the ezov and the shnitzolas. So I might have thought that you don't need a kohen there, kamash malan, that you do. Beautiful. What about the next pasuk? Afterwards, you're going to clean your clothes. So the Gemara is a drasha, bekihu, know that when he does the language, when he does the begadim, when he does the kibus, he has to make sure that he is wearing a begadim that a kohen typically wear, not his big techel. What does the pasuk mean? It's the same pasuk. It continues with tamei kohen ad ha'arev. What does that mean? Kohen bekihuno ledoros, that he always has to be like this for generations. So hanicha, this I could understand this answer, Laman Damar Ladoris Bekohen Hedyot Shapir. If you want to say that the Kohen, this is the first answer that we saw a couple of lines ago, the answer of Shmuel, that if what we're saying is that the person who's being Mechabes Begadav can even be a Kohen Hedyot, then that makes sense. Laman Damar Ladoris Bekohen Gadol. If what you're saying is that really the person who has to do the kibbutz is a Kohen Gadol, so then hashta Kohen Gadol ba'inan b'kihuno miboya. So then why do I need the extra use of the word Kohen here? It's going to be the Kohen Gadol. I don't need you to tell me that it needs to be a random Kohen. You should be specific and tell me who it is, not a general Kohen. Says the Gemara, you make a good kal v'chomer, and because you do, we therefore need the pasuk milsa da'asi v'kal v'chomer tarach v'kasav lakra. Because you have a svara, because you have a kal v'chomer, a very logical progression to assume that maybe it should be different, maybe it should be a Kohen Gadol. So therefore, says the Gemara, Tarach v'kasav lakra, to give us the correct information. And that brings us to almost the halfway mark on Mem Gimel Amud Aleph. The pasuk reads, now that we've done the whole process, now the fire's been done, the animal's been burnt, right? We've been very mesudar, we've learned about Hotzah, we've learned about Nesina, giving of the animal to the Kohen, we've learned about Hotzah, taking it out to the place where it's going to be shechted. We've learned about the Shechita, we've learned about the Tibul B'dam, sticking the dam be'etzbo. We've learned about the secondary pieces of the hakrava and how they're treated by the Amoraim. Now, what about collecting the ashes? So this is a bit of a lengthier stretch. This is going to be almost till the end of the page. There is a man who is going to collect the ish tahor, a pure man who's going to collect the efer apara v'hiniach, and he's going to place it somewhere. So says the Gemara has a drasha, ish. When it says that there is a man, it's lahachshir es hazar. It's to teach you that when it says ish, that it can even be a non-kohen. What does the word tahor mean in the pasuk? It says v'asaf ish tahor. So it says lahachshir es ha'isha, to tell us that even a woman can be included in the asifa of the efer hapara, the ashes. What does the word v'hiniach mean? Says the Gemara, misheyesh bo das lahaniach. The word v'hiniach means to say that it's a level of skill. You have to have the das in order to be able to do the hanacha. And who does that exclude? Yatzu chereshot v'katan she'ein bohen das lehaniach. We assume that a katan, a chereshot, and a katan, that these three groups of people don't have das, and therefore they cannot do a maisa that has das, and therefore because they can't be meniach, they also cannot collect the efer hapara. However, this is a problem Because halfway down, the Gemara quotes a Mishnah, Tnan Hasam. We have a Mishnah that's quoted in Maseches Psachim. We learned this many months ago. This is, 120 blot ago. Says the Gemara, Tnan Hasam, the Mishnah writes, Akol Ksherim Lakadesh. Everyone is allowed to be Makadesh. What does Lakadesh mean in this context? It means to add the water to the Efer HaPara. This question is about adding water to the Efer HaPara, but we're going to be asking about collecting the Efer, which was what we learned previously. But let's see if we can ask a question from adding water to the Efer. So, Hakol Ksher and Lakadesh Chutz Michereshot V'Katan. However, Reb Yehuda Machshir B'Katan Uposel B'Ishuv Androgenes. The Tanakama is of the opinion from the Mishnah Maseches Psachim that everyone's allowed to do the Kiddush with the exception of Chershot of a Katan. And Rabbi Yehuda says he does allow for a Katan, but he's posel B'Isha uva androgenes, androgyny, someone who is manifesting both of the simanim of Zachrus v'Nakvus. They have both male and female anatomy. So it says the Gemara, they're excluded, but a child is allowed. Now let's analyze these two shitas. My time of the Rabbanon. What is the reason of the Rabbanon to exclude Chereshot Katan, but seemingly to include women? Says the Gemara, Dechsiv v'lakechul atamei me'afar sreifa sachatas. Hanach depas leila be'asifa, a katan who is not allowed to collect in the gathering, as we saw from the drasha in our pasuk, which is about halfway down. He is pas leilach bekidush. He's not allowed to add water to the afer. He's not allowed to do that because he's puzzle for the asifa. And according to those who we allow to do the asifa, namely women, so that explains the sheet of the Tanakama, why he still doesn't allow a child, because he was forbidden. Why we don't allow a child, let me just be more thorough and clear. In the case of the kiddush, when it comes to adding water, we don't allow him to do it there because he wasn't even allowed to collect the ashes. Masha'en Kain and Isha, she was allowed to collect the ashes, therefore she's allowed to add the water. Rabbi Yehuda, what's his reason? Rabbi Yehuda responds, that can't be pshat. Tanakama has to be wrong. Why does the Tanakama have to be wrong? Because imkain lama kara velakach. The pasuk should lama imkain lema kara velakach. The pasuk should have said in the singular velakach, and he took. My velakachu. Says the Gemara, why does it say plural? The afilu katan, the pasuk lachasam hacha kasher. It says it's plural. It's teaching us more of an inclusion because it's plural. It's not just one, it's two. So that which was pasul before, namely a child, a katan, who was not allowed to do the asifa of the para, he couldn't collect the ashes, even though he's pasul over there. But because v'lakhu is plural, so therefore we should be more inclusive and we should say hacha kasher, that the child is allowed. So isha minale, where do we learn the halacha of an isha that she should be excluded? It says v'nasan v'lo v'nasna, that she should not be allowed under certain circumstances. That's going to be the shita of Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda says posel b'ishuv androgenes. Iver Rabbanan, what do you do with this drasha? No, you learned it wrong. Rabbi Yehuda, you tried to exclude a woman because it says v'nasan and it didn't say v'nasna, but you're looking at it a little too narrowly because there's more going on in the pasuk. The Rabbanan, according to the Tanakama, who include women in the process of kiddush, we say that they are allowed to be the ones to add water to the Efer HaPara. So Zog the Gemara as follows. The Rabbanan, the Tanakama, how do you hold? If the pasuk had been both in singular without any plurals in the word velakach v'nasan, which isn't the case. Had it been that way, then hava mina the shakil chad v'yoev chad. I might have thought one person can do one, just the asifa sapara, and the other can do another, which is the adding of the water. Kasav rachmana v'lakhu. Therefore, the Torah wrote in plural to remove us from thinking that way. And then the ikasav rachmana, had it been that both of them were v'lakhu v'nasnu, the both of the verbs of v'lakach and v'nasan, that had they both been in the plural and not in the singular, and that it said lakhu v'nasnu, what might I have thought? Hava mina. I might have thought of the shakle tray v'yahabe tray. I might have thought that it has to be two people at a time, two people for the asifa and two people for the kiddush to add the water to the ash. Therefore, kasav rachmana, to preclude from there v'lakhu and v'nasan de'afilu shakle trei v'yavchad. It doesn't have to be the same number of people who do one who do the other. And because the pasuk was already being utilized for that, so therefore the word v'nasan, you cannot use that, Rabbi Yehuda, to teach us that a woman is excluded from the kiddush to add water to the ashes. That's just not correct, because says the Gemara in the name of the Tanakama, those words are already being used for other things. And that brings us 5-6 lines from the bottom. Next pasuk, now we're all the way at the end of the process. We've done everything else. Now you're actually going to make someone tahor. You've got the ash and the water all mixed together. Mixed together the mechatas. It says the Gemara, you take the azov, you take the hisab, v'taval b'mayim ish tahor. So it says the Gemara, how is this understood? Lirabbanon, according to the Tanakama, Ish velo isha. The pasuk says ish, and here we exclude a woman. And what does the word tahor mean? Lahachshir asakatan, to teach us that a child is included, that he's allowed to do this. Well, the Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yehuda, how does he learn the psukim? Ish, what does it mean? Ish velo katan. No, ish is an adult. It's an adult male. You could have learned ish as a drasha to exclude isha. For example, if you say, the word isha is the opposite of what? So you might say isha and you might say yeled. Right? So that's what the Gemara is saying. We're looking at the word ish velo katan. That's how Rabbi Yehuda learns the pasuk. How does he learn the word tahor? Le'achshir as isha. So we have a machlokas as to how we understand these psukim in regards to who is allowed to actually do the process of tahara. Again, once it's already made. And this Gemara has been very organized and very thorough to go through every step. And that's what we've gotten up to so far. Asks the Gemara, Meisive, Hakol Ksher in Hazos, everyone's allowed to do the Hazah of the Mechatas. Everyone's allowed to sprinkle the ash water. That's fine. Who it's mitumtum ve'androgonous ve'isha, with the exception of someone who's a tumtum, whose genitalia are not revealed. We don't know what gender the child is. Ve'androgonous, someone who has both of the anatomies, ve'isha and a woman. They're all excluded. However, says the Gemara, v'katan sheyeshbo, and maybe even v'katan she'enbo, machlokas in the girsa here. You can see there in the Gilion on the side by the Hagos v'tzion, and we're not sure which one. So either a katan that has das or one that doesn't. Sheyeshbo das, isha misayato mazeh, that a woman can help and can then they'd be allowed to do the hazah. That's of course very interesting because the isha was just excluded a line above. We're not going to dig into this, but let's get to our question. We're now on the top of Mem Gimel Amud Beis. Said the Gemara. If our previous machlokas was true, where's Rabbi Yehuda? You should be kicking and screaming. How can you say that that's allowed? Says the Gemara that velo polig Rabbi Yehuda. Why isn't he arguing here? So says the Gemara. Of course he argues here. Amar Abaye kevan de Amar Mar. Since as we started the day today, we learned this principle that mashma motzi miad mashma umashma memela. That since we have some drashos that say one way, and then the next pasuk will immediately say the other way, and it'll be motzi miad mashma. And then another time you'll see that it'll be umashma memela, that the next drasha will match perfectly. We should therefore assume, Palig, that Rabbi Yehuda is not going to say something every single time it comes up. We should assume that he argues throughout as a theme. He's just going to keep his party line. So we assume there was a machlokas. Next drasha, and this is going to be our last drasha. V'hizah tahor al hatamei. A person who's tahor has to do the sprinkling onto a tamei. So when it says the word tahor, mechlal shehu tamei, that used to at one point be tamei. And says the Gemara, limed al tvul yom. What we learn from here is that a tvul yom shekasher bepara. Wow, that a person who's a tvul yom, he became tamei. He went to the mikvah already. However, the tvul yom is someone who's gone to the mikvah. He's done everything physical that he needs to do, but the clock hasn't ended up yet. He has to make sure that the sun sets in order for him to be tahor. So he's not there yet. So he's kind of in the twilight zone of the tahara status. It says the Gemara, because the pasuk says tahor, we learn from there to include a tvul yom in the elements in the process of the para aduma. Amar Rav Asi, 5 lines down, Mem Gimel Amud Beis. Rav Asi says, Ki havu ba Rav Yochanan v'Reish Lakish bepara. When Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish were learning the sugya of para aduma, when they were learning the psukim, says the Gemara, lo maske mina. The only thing they extracted from it was as much as elakemai the masik talemi bekrava. As much as a fox would come out from an empty field, he'd have dust on their feet. In other words, they only picked up a little bit. The psukim are difficult. So if you have trouble learning the psukim of para adum in a halachic way, you're in extremely good company of Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish. And that's why this Gemara has been chosen to present the idea of mashma motzi miad mashma umashma memela. To present a case where psukim in one pasuk may look one way, or I should say even better, in one part of the process of para aduma, it may look one way, and in the very next pasuk, it may look very different. And that's why the Gemara detailed all of the 8 psukim that we just analyzed, all of the various steps. You have the nesina to the kohen, you have the hotzah, you have the shlita, you have the dam, you have the collecting of the ashes, you have the mixing of the ashes, you have sticking the eitz azov into the mechatas. There's so many steps. So you have the actual sprinkling, and then we define the sprinkling all in order, tightly done. But much as it's organized, we have to recognize that the drashos were not simple. Says the Gemara, Ella Amre, what do we say? That this is the sugya to say, mashma motzi miad mashma umashma memela. This is one of the more difficult parshios in the Torah to learn in that regard, because sometimes it can just be confusing from one pasuk to the next. Tana Kame de Rav Yochanan. This is going back to a sugya we learned already. There was a brisa that was taught in front of Rav Yochanan, and what was said? It said, Kol hashchitos ksheros bezar chutz mishal para, that every shchita is allowed with a non-kohen, with the exception of a para aduma. So Amar le Rav Yochanan, Sorry, Pope Tani Levra, go out and see what's happening in the world. We don't have any cases, even by the Paraduma, where a non-Kohen does the shchita and it causes for a problem. Rav Yochanan was pushing back on a brisa. That's what the Gemara said. It said, how is it presented? Tani Tana Kamed Rav Yochanan. Rav Yochanan's an Amora. He was pushing against the brisa, says the Gemara. It wasn't bad enough that he pushed against that. Rav Yochanan Lomi Boya. We don't even need to say how bad it is that Latana de Lotzai said he wasn't listening to one of the Tanaim. But it gets even worse. How does it get worse? Because Ella Afilu the Rabbi Lotzai, he didn't even listen to his own Rebbe. Why? What happened? Tamar Rav Yochanan, Mishum Rav Shimon ben Yehotzadak, who in the Gemara it's presented that this is his Rebbe. What did his Rebbe say? Shchitas para bizar psula. Taka, like we saw initially, like in the brisa that was presented to Rav Yochanan, that if the para aduma was shechted by a non-Kohen, it would be a problem. And Rabbi Yochanan says, I'm sorry, Rebbe, you're wrong. Lo matzinu shlita shepsula bazar. Wow, very strong presentation in the Gemara, because we therefore see that shlita is never psula bazar. And that brings us to the two dots, 1/3 of the way down, balo etzel paroshnia. And we ask the following question: why is the second vidui that the Kohen is going to be doing on his par, the paro shel Kohen Gadol, why is it different than the first one? Says the Gemara. In the first vidui, we didn't say not only for me, but also for the children of Aaron and Am Kedoshecha. Why? And in the second one, so answers the Gemara, because he was being very methodical in how he was asking for kapara. The way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu structured the kapara of the par with the multiple viduis was to make sure that the following was true. It's better that in the first vidui that the Kohen Gadol should get kapara. And now that he has kapara in the second vidui, he should be davening for other people. Absolutely, that's the right way to do it. Mutav yavo zakai v'chaper al hachayev v'al yavo chayev v'chaper al hachayev. It's better that he should first generate his own kapara through the vidui on a Hashem. He should first generate his own vidui, which is his first vidui on the par, and then only afterwards can he daven for Klal Yisrael. Then says that brings us to the next Mishnah, and the Mishnah reads as follows, and then we will stop at the bottom of the page, 2 lines from the bottom. The Mishnah reads as follows. Afterwards, shachto, he's going to shech the par, and then says the Gemara, v'kivel b'mizrak es damo, he's going to receive the blood in a container. V'nosno lemishu memarespo al haroved haravi'i shebehechal kadesh lo yikrosh. They would give it to someone who is going to be the stirrer. His job was to stir the blood, to be memares, and he would be on the 4th roved. We'll discuss this more in the Gemara, but it seems to be that it was like the way that the Beis HaMikdash was tiled. It's the 4th row of tiles, shebehechal, so kadesh lo yikrosh, so that the blood wouldn't congeal. You can't do zrikas adam if the blood congeals. If you've ever dealt with blood, it congeals pretty quickly outside of the body. And then says the Gemara, that's part 1 of the Mishnah, part 2 of the Mishnah. And then Natal Machta, he would take a shovel, and he'd go to the top of the Mizbeach to get the coals in order to go into the Kodesh. He would move the coals around in order to get to the bottom. He would go into the deepest parts, to the embers, the pieces of coal, of really wood, the pieces of wood that were the hottest. And then and then he would take that and he would also put that down on the 4th set of tiles, the 4th row of tiles. The Gemara Mishnah from here on out is going to give comparisons of every day versus the day of Yom Kippur. Really, normally what he would do is he would collect it. He would use a shovel that was made out of silver, and he would and he'd put it into something that was besoch shel zahav. However, that's all he would use. He wouldn't change materials. It was only made out of silver, only made out of gold on Yom Kippur. Next. He would take out 4, but only pour into a container of 3. He would only take 3 and put in 3, and that was it. Rabbi Yossi, he would do much more. Shalosh sa is 6 kabin. So that's double the amount than we thought it was. But he'd only pour off into a container of 3. But Yom Kippur, only would use 3. Next, 3/4 of the way down in the middle of the Mishnah. Normally they'd use a heavy utensil, but today they'd use a lighter utensil. A lot of these, right, the Meforshim, a lot of these ideas was to make it a little easier for the Kohen Gadol because it was Yom Kippur and he was fasting and he had a lot of work to do. It says the Gemara about Yom Kala, this is going to be a lighter one. Sometimes they would use a shorter handled shovel. The Hayom Aruka, they'd use another one. So some of the Meforshim explained that if you're holding something that's very long and you could prop it under your arm as you hold it, so you'll hold the rod out here, but it's very long to the extent so then you have an easier way to carry it. So that's what it means that it's Aruka. So it says the Gemara, says the Mishnah, the handle was short, but Hayom Arucha, it was easier for the Kohen because it was a longer handle. Throughout the year, it had a golden, the gold had a greenish color to it. Hayom Edom, it was going to have a reddish color to it. Divrei Rabbi Menachem. Normally we would have done half in the morning, half at night. But today we actually add a little bit more. This is some of the brises that we read in Korbanos, that is machnis yada malachofna b'yom kippurim. Next, normally the flour that they would use was very fine, and today it would be finer than fine. It would be really just tremendously well done flour. Normally people would go up the eastern side of the ramp, which is further away from the Heichal, and they would come down the Yarden Ma'aravo to the western side of the ramp, which was the side closer to the Heichal. But the Kohen Gadol would always walk right up the midline of the Kevesh. That was just not a difference. He said even year round, the Kohen Gadol would walk up the middle of the ramp. Every day of the year, the Kohen Gadol would wash from the kior. Remember, we discussed about Ben Katin that he made 12 spigots so that all the Kohanim could do the process at the same time. They could do Kiddush Adayim v'Raglaim at the same time. And we also know that the earlier version of the kior had only 2 spigots, one at the higher part on a higher part because there was more water. They would try to use that one for the morning. And then for the afternoon, they'd use the lower spigot. And that would just help them keep a measure of water. B'chol yom, says the Gemara, 8 lines from the bottom. B'chol yom kohen gadol mekadesh yadav v'raglav min hakior. But v'hayom min hakiton shel zahav. They had a separate container, a ketone, some type of jug that was made out of gold. They would be the difference. It says the Gemara, Yudamar la'olam kohen gadol mekadesh yadav v'raglav min hakiton shel zahav. That was true during the year as well. Next, b'chol yom hayusham arba ma'arachos. There were normally 4 fires on the mizbech. Yom chamesh divrei Reb Meir, but now there's 5, and Yom Kippur there's more. Rabbi Yossi Omer b'chol yom shalosh. Really, there's usually 3. V'hayom arba, and today there's 4. That was a sheet of Rabbi Yehuda, of Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yehuda Omer b'chol yom shtayim v'hayom shalosh. Really, there's normally 2, but today there's 3. That brings us to the end of the Mishnah. We're going to stop right here, and Amir Tashem will pick up tomorrow at some point. I'll post a video. I'm not sure when yet, and we will learn tomorrow Daf Mem Daled. Wishing you all a beautiful